Welcome back to the Ready Brew. My name's T Edge, and today we are discussing Ethiopia. If you've been enjoying the content thus far, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and I want to thank you for hanging in there with me to this point. Let's go ahead and conclude this teaching on the difference between Ethiopia and Africa. You know, I want to talk about it. Let's go. But is it possible that the derivation was formulated from a racial perspective? James Strong, the creator of the Strong's Concordance, was a Methodist theologian and Bible scholar who was born in 1822 at the height of chattel slavery in the United States. Slavery was a pervasive practice that he was witness to in his lifetime, for the most of his lifetime at that, because he died in 1894. The Strong's Concordance itself was published in 1890. So do you think maybe there was a racial bias during the time of the conception? The successor of the Strong's was the Brown Driver Briggs, or BDB. It was first published in 1906, being translated from the Hebrew German lexicon. And I think it's very coincidental that the same people who had dispelled the Jews just a little more than 400 years prior would use the same meaning as the Strong's to understand the meaning of Cush. I mean, think about it. Every lexicographer since has used the same reasoning and understanding with the same Bible references. Is there a way to refute the understanding and translation that these men derived using their bias? Can we use the Bible and the references that it gives using the exact geographical demarcations? Or were these men smarter than the Bible authors? Can we use the archaeology found, or did the Hamites just migrate through the land of the Middle East from Africa, leaving artifacts behind? What can we use outside of saying that these men were likely racists who had been influenced by the times and the understanding of the curse of Ham? How about we put the etymology of the word Ethiopia into the discussion? This word, we're told in all our commentaries, all of our Bible dictionaries, and all the classic Bible tales and stories, that it means to be Negro or one of burnt face. After all, Ethiopia is Africa, right? I mean, is that truly what the Bible implies? There's at least one linguistic scholar who thinks as I do, or should I say that I think like he does, at least in the respect to who the Ethiopian people are not. Robert Stephen Paul Beeks was a Dutch professor of comparative Indo-European linguistics at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He wrote an article in which he first takes a linguistic approach, showing that the word Ethiopia, although translated to mean with burnt faces in its Greek form, has absolutely nothing to do with black, brown, or dark. He asserts that every part of the word presents a problem when trying to tie it to a distinctive group of people. I'll have the article pages posted somewhere here or either at the end of the video if you like to pause and read them for yourself. But he concludes that the eth or eighth means shining, bright, or burning. And the op means to see, but not in the context of looking. So the idea that the Ethiop means black looking or with burnt faces is unsupported, and he calls it folk etymology. In other words, he's saying that it's pseudo. There's no way to get burnt from the adjective any other way. In fact, the word itself is older than the Greek language, so it's not a word that you can use Greek to get the proper understanding of. I'd like to add, just as more fodder for the fire, that the people of Greece worshiped the goddess Hestia, and they had a perpetual fire. Could that be the reason they were known as Ethiops, which means bright, shining, or burning? Or maybe it's because of the people who inhabited the area known as Mesopotamia, who worshipped fire via the religion known as Zoroastrianism. Could they be the reason that the people were called Ethiopians, which means to shine bright or to burn? Once Professor Beeks brings us to this conclusion, he takes us to the logical explanation that the meaning from which he concludes that the Ethiopians were actually more likely to be the inhabitants of northern Greece, which is Eastern Europe and Macedonia. That's clearly not Africa. So Professor R.S.P. Beeks used linguistics and the explanation of the territories of Greek mythology to determine that the Ethiopians weren't black at all, and they didn't live in Africa. Now, all who've heard me speak on the inhabitants of Cush or Ethiopia have heard me say unabashedly that the Ethiopians were the people of Mesopotamia. There appears to be, I know, this fairly large strip of land between Greek Macedonia and Mesopotamia. So how can this be reconciled? Now, before you call me pseudo, let's consider history. Before the Common Era, in 323 BC, Alexander the Great had taken over the territory that is known today as Mesopotamia, effectively making it a Greek territory. Now, being that the Ethiops or the Ethiopians inhabited northern Greece, it's not at all a stretch for the people of the Mesopotamian territory to become known as Ethiopians, being ruled by Alexander the Great, the most prolific Greek ruler of our historical survey. It's also known that Ptolemy I took control in Egypt after the death of Alexander, he himself also being a Macedonian Greek. He started what is known as the Ptolemaic dynasty. It was during this era that the Egyptians began to be called Ethiopians. Now, although Alexander's kingdom crumbled after 12 years, the legacy has long lived on. So we can conclude without the shadow of a doubt, other than the doubt cast by our cognitive dissonance or the bias that has been afforded to us by this post-transatlantic slave trade narrative. This rhetoric has ruled our scholarship in academic circles now since the 1800s. And it says that the Ethiopians were black. But using this information, we can conclude that the Ethiopians were not black, and they certainly were not of African origin. They were the inhabitants of Greece, and their name was adopted by or transferred to the Cushites of Mesopotamia and all of those other Hamite territories from Egypt to India, nearly 300 years before the birth of Christ. So, when it comes to Moses' wife, that Ethiopian woman he married, she was a Middle Eastern woman from Iraq. Just consider where the congregation was geographically on their trek to inhabit the land of the Hamites. The Ethiopian eunuch of Queen Candace was not an African. Remember, even if she was stationed in Africa at the time, Egypt was being ruled by the Greeks of Macedonia. So she would have been of the light-skinned Greek variety. But consider the Ethiopian eunuch's travels compared to Philip's. Philip was told to go south toward Gaza, and he ran into a eunuch who was headed north, returning home. Plus, when it comes to the culture of castration, it's largely an Asian custom. The eunuchs of Mesopotamia were given the status of royalty as they forfeited the opportunity to have their own children, which would explain why he was in charge of the queen's treasury. Now, I also took a look to see who the queen of Mesopotamia or Ethiopia was at the time of the disciples. And there was this Queen Helen of Adiabene, Assyria, who had recently converted to the Jewish religion. This could explain why the eunuch was in Jerusalem for worship. Although there's been an attempt made to connect Moreau with the Ethiopia of Scripture, when we have been provided the explanation of etymology, history, and geography of the original Ethiopia, this pseudo scholarship falls short. So there should be no more excitement over the word Ethiopia when it comes to black people in Scripture. I mean, it's true that the Shemites did mix with the Hamites, but there has to be a change in perspective. The Hamites were quote unquote white skinned. I mean, some of them were brown, like the Indian people, and the Shemites were black skinned Africans. Although it's been a couple hundred years of the idea of the Ethiopians are black, it's okay to look and find the truth. Does it call into question the scholarship of so many before us? Sure it does, but does it discredit their work? Not at all, because it's what we need when it comes to searching for truth. When it comes to scholarship, there's going to always be differences of opinion. Even with the information that I have presented here, there'll be a pushback because it's not what our fathers have believed. But what do you believe? Do you believe I got something wrong in my presentation? Do you believe that I'm mistaken in any way? Leave some comments in the comment section below. Again, thank you for joining me here at The Ready Brew. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel on your way out. But until the next time, peace.
Ever since the day came, my whole world began to change. I knew then that there came my life for your own, and this day will come. Every day I see you grow, and remember what you already know. I receive the love that radiates from your glow. Yeah. From which you came was love, and that's how it all should be. You and my soul are one. Through all the time in history,